They were a family bound by blood, but one daughter's unrelenting pain and thirst for revenge would turn everything to ashes. One night, the past came roaring back, and with it, a fiery reckoning that no one could have foreseen. The neighbors said they heard music, something soft, maybe Nina Simone, floating through the windows. Then, the explosion. Flames lit up the night sky. Inside, a family slept peacefully, drugged and unaware, until it was too late. This wasn't just a murder. It was an execution. A ceremony. A baptism in fire. How does a lifetime of silence, abuse, and betrayal shape a person? What happens when the rage from years of torment erupts in a fiery storm that engulfs everything in its path? When the people who were supposed to protect you become the very demons you have to destroy? Before we dive into this harrowing tale, like this video and subscribe for more chilling accounts of vengeance, trauma, and the darkness lurking beneath the surface. 19 years old Tameika Griggs was born into a house that wore its darkness like wallpaper. Tucked deep in a worn-down neighborhood in Shreveport, Louisiana, the Griggs family seemed, from a distance, like any other working-class black family trying to survive in the South. But beyond that weather-beaten screen door, behind those faded curtains, was a legacy of fear, silence, and secrets buried beneath the floorboards. Her father, Archibald "Archie" Griggs, was a 58-year-old Vietnam veteran with scars that didn't come from the battlefield. He moved through the world like a man still at war, with everything and everyone. He didn't just command respect. He demanded it, enforced it with bruises and bullets, and silenced it with scripture. He had one of those old Baptist voices, loud, booming, full of fire and brimstone. He could quote the Bible while slapping a child across the mouth, then pray over the same hand he used to hurt them. People in the neighborhood called him Reverend behind his back, not because he preached, but because he spoke like one. And like a pastor in his own twisted church, his house was his sanctuary, his rules, his rage, his ruin. Berthina Griggs, 49, was once a beauty. Bright smile, caramel skin, hair she used to press and curl every Saturday before church. But by the time Tameika turned 5, that brightness had gone out of her. She had learned to live with her eyes low and her mouth shut. Berthina had been Archie's since she was 16, his teenage bride, hand-picked and home-trained. Somewhere along the way, she stopped resisting and started surviving. People say trauma changes you, but for Berthina, it hollowed her out completely. She wasn't a mother. Not in the way Tameika needed. She was a gatekeeper to a house of horrors, watching everything and doing nothing. The kind of woman who would stare down her daughter's pain and tell her to pray it away. Tameika was Archie's only daughter, and his favorite, in the most perverse way imaginable. The sexual assault started early, when she was just 5 years old. Gentle at first, masked as affection. A kiss on the cheek that lingered too long. A hand that wandered while reading bedtime stories. Then it escalated. And when she was 7 years old, Berthina walked in and saw it, Archie, in the act. Caught red-handed. Tameika thought that was it. Thought finally, her mama would scream. Fight. Run. But instead, Berthina turned around, walked out, and closed the door behind her. That moment split Tameika in two. She tried to speak out. Over and over again. Teachers, school counselors, church ladies in flowy dresses who always said God would make a way. She told them all. But every time, Archie would show up, clean-shaven, smelling of aftershave and lies. He'd laugh and say, young girls like to tell stories. He'd pat the teacher's shoulder, quote a Bible verse, maybe even cry a little. And like magic, the concern would disappear. No report. No home visit. Nothing. And when they got home, he'd remind her, ain't nobody coming to save you, little girl. By the time she was 15, Tameika had already had 3 abortions. Quiet, hidden procedures paid for with Archie's military benefits and smoothed over with hush money and forged papers. Berthina would sit in the clinic lobby, stone-faced, clutching a Bible, never asking a single question. Tameika wanted someone to scream, to cry, to care. But all she got was silence. Her brothers, Devonte, Lamarcus, and Rondarian, they knew. Oh, they knew. They saw the bruises, heard the crying, watched their sister disappear piece by piece. But they didn't speak. Archie's rage wasn't reserved for Tameika. He ruled over all of them with an iron belt and the barrel of a Smith & Wesson. He once shot a hole through the kitchen wall because Rondarian dropped a plate. Another time, he dangled Lamarcus off the back porch for getting suspended. He didn't yell, he demonstrated. He wanted obedience, not love. Fear, not family. And fear is what he got. The boys never talked back. Never looked him in the eye. They were prisoners just like Tameika, only their cells were bigger. And no matter how much they wanted to protect her, they were too scared to move. Archie was a walking nightmare, and in their home, nightmares didn't end when you woke up. As the years went on, as the assault continued, Tameika's mind became a battlefield. She began having episodes, long stretches of silence followed by sudden, violent outbursts. Sometimes, she'd just sit in her room for hours, staring into the mirror. Not at herself, but at a little girl inside, screaming for help. Other times, she'd throw things. Scream. Lash out. But no matter what she did, the house stayed quiet. The silence grew louder. The betrayal more bitter. The wounds deeper. Every Sunday, they went to church. Sat on the same pew. Archie with his arm around Berthina, Tameika between her brothers. From the outside, they were the perfect family. But inside that girl was a storm. Years of rage and pain bottled up in silence. A silence that was slowly turning into fire. No one ever saved her. So one day, she decided she'd have to save herself. At 17, Tameika Griggs slipped out of the Griggs house under cover of night, a duffel bag on her shoulder and a fire in her chest that no one could put out. She didn't tell anyone goodbye. She didn't leave a note. She just walked out the back door, barefoot, heartbeat in her throat, praying Archie didn't hear the creak of that loose porch step. She hitched a ride with a trucker headed east and never looked back. He dropped her off in Monroe, Louisiana, 3 hours from the place that stole her childhood. Monroe wasn't salvation. It was just another broken town with peeling paint and quiet poverty, but to Tameika, it was freedom. And freedom, even if it was cold and hungry and unforgiving, was still better than Archie. The first few weeks were brutal. She slept in shelters, sometimes in the back of abandoned cars. She washed herself in gas station sinks and ate whatever she could hustle or scavenge. There were moments when she almost turned around, almost went crawling back to Shreveport with an apology and tears. But then she'd remember Archie's eyes. Berthina's silence. The way her brothers pretended not to see. That was all the motivation she needed to keep pushing forward. Eventually, she found a job watching kids for a single father named Harlan Bexley. He ran a small repair business out of his garage, oil changes, tire patches, brake jobs. Folks said he kept to himself, but always paid on time. He was in his mid-40s, white, heavy-set, with a thick southern drawl and a stare that lingered a little too long. At first, Harlan seemed harmless. Just a man trying to raise his twin boys after their mama ran off. He'd hired Tameika under the table, cash in hand, no questions asked. She was grateful. It was the first time in her life she had a place to sleep that wasn't lined with fear. But monsters come in all shapes, and Harlan's mask didn't take long to slip. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, Harlan called her into the kitchen. Said he had something to talk about. He was drunk, leaning against the fridge, eyes glassy, smelling of whiskey and sweat. He started with compliments. Said she was different. Said she had grown into a woman. And then, he moved in close. Tameika froze. It was like being 7 again, trapped in a nightmare with no door. But this time, something in her snapped. Harlan reached for her, and she backed away. He laughed, thought it was a game. When she said no, he didn't listen. He never got the chance to make her a victim. There was a steak knife on the counter. She grabbed it without thinking, pure instinct. When he lunged, she didn't scream. She stabbed. Once. Twice. A third time. When it was over, Harlan was on the floor, blood pooling around him, his eyes wide open in shock. Tameika stood over him, chest heaving, hands shaking, tears cutting through her face like acid. She hadn't meant to kill him. But she wasn't sorry he was dead. The neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. She didn't run. She didn't lie. When they arrived, she was still standing in the kitchen, hands covered in blood, the knife on the ground beside her. They arrested her for second-degree murder. The trial made headlines across Monroe. Teen girl kills employer in cold blood. The press painted her as dangerous, ungrateful, unstable. But once the evidence came out, the bruises on her wrists, the history of trauma, the psych evaluations, it became clear this wasn't murder. It was self-defense. Her public defender was young and green, but he believed her. And more importantly, he fought like hell for her. The jury took just 3 hours to deliver a verdict. Not guilty. Acquitted. Free to go. But freedom didn't feel like victory. Because even though she'd survived, something inside her had died that night. The part of her that still hoped. Still trusted. Still believed in rescue. It was gone now, buried with Harlan's body. Tameika left the courthouse a free woman, but she was no longer a girl trying to escape the past. She was a woman forged in violence, carved by betrayal, and held together by rage. And that rage was no longer quiet. It had a pulse. A name. A purpose. Because the past wasn't done with her yet. And she wasn't done with it either. It was August 4, 2023, when Tameika Griggs returned to Shreveport. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, and the air was thick with heat, the kind that made sweat cling to skin like regret. She stepped off that Greyhound bus like a woman baptized in fire, carrying a duffel bag full of clothes, a rosary around her wrist, and something far heavier resting quietly in her heart. The people she passed on the street wouldn't have known it, but Shreveport was about to become a crime scene. Again. It had been 2 years since she fled that town like a fugitive. 2 years since she stood in a courtroom and was declared not guilty. 2 years since she buried her innocence under Harlan Bexley's blood. Now, she was back, but not as the scared, broken girl who ran away. She had learned how to wear masks. How to speak softly while carrying hell in her back pocket. When she knocked on the Griggs' front door, it was Berthina who opened it, older now, thinner, her face lined with more worry than age. Tameika smiled. Said she was back for a spiritual retreat in town. Claimed she'd found salvation in God and forgiveness through prayer. She spoke in the soft, syrupy tone of a woman reborn. Said she wanted to make peace. And for the first time in a long time, her mother cried. Berthina pulled her into a hug and whispered, "Archie's been different lately." Tameika didn't ask what that meant. She didn't care. A monster who slowed down was still a monster. Inside, nothing had changed. The living room was still dark and suffocating, lined with old photographs and cigarette smoke. The same broken clock on the wall. The same crushed velvet sofa. The same Bible on the coffee table, gathering dust like a forgotten promise. Archie was there. Sitting in his recliner. 64 years old now, body worn but spirit still venomous. He looked at Tameika and didn't smile. Just nodded once and said, "You finally come to your senses, girl." She smiled back. Said something like that. Her brothers, Devonte, Lamarcus, and Rondarian, were there too. All grown now. Still living in the same house, still orbiting their father's fury like moths around a flame. They greeted her awkwardly, all of them unsure of what to say. She was the sister who left. The sister who talked. And yet, they welcomed her back. That's the thing about toxic families, loyalty sometimes matters more than truth. That evening, Tameika offered to make dinner. A peace offering, she called it. Said she brought gumbo from Monroe, her own recipe. Thick, rich, full of shrimp, sausage, and okra. They all sat down at the kitchen table like it was just another night. Archie said grace with his usual bitterness, blessing the food but not the hands that made it. They ate. And as they did, something strange began to happen. One by one, their heads began to nod. Forks slipped from fingers. Eyes grew heavy. Voices slurred. Within 20 minutes, the kitchen table was surrounded by the unconscious. The gumbo had been laced with temazepam, a powerful sedative. Not enough to kill, but enough to knock out a man twice Archie's size. Tameika stood there watching them fall, one by one, like dominoes collapsing in slow motion. No panic. No hesitation. Just that eerie, psychotic calmness she'd perfected in therapy sessions she never believed in. And when the last of them hit the floor, she turned off the lights. Lit a single candle. And walked toward the hallway where the old family photos still hung. The storm outside had finally broken, thunder cracked, rain slammed the roof. Inside, silence. It was time. Time for the reckoning that had been growing like a tumor since she was 7 years old. Tameika had come home. And this time, she wasn't the victim. The house on Linwood Avenue had never known peace. For decades, it had held screams behind its walls, secrets in its floorboards, and pain in every creaking beam. That night, it was finally going to know silence. Tameika moved like a ghost through the house, barefoot, focused, untouched by emotion. The Griggs family lay scattered across the living room and hallway, unconscious and unmoving, their bodies heavy with the drugged gumbo still settling in their stomachs. Tameika didn't rush. She had waited too long for this moment to be careless. One by one, she uncapped each of the 6 plastic containers she'd hauled in from the duffel bag. Gallons of gasoline, heavy and pungent, sloshing like waves of vengeance. She walked room to room, dousing everything, curtains, carpets, furniture, walls. She poured it on the family photos, soaking the memories in accelerant. She coated the recliner in the living room where Archie ruled for decades like a king built from rusted armor and rage. The kitchen, the hallway, the bedrooms, nothing was spared. Even the floorboards drank it up greedily, like they, too, had been waiting for the fire. She worked in silence. Then, when it was done, she returned to the living room, lit a cigarette, and sat on the arm of the couch. Nina Simone's voice filled the room from an old stereo she found in the corner. "I put a spell on you," soft, haunting, and slow. The room reeked of gasoline and ghosts. Tameika watched the bodies. Listened to the rain still tapping on the roof. For the first time in her life, the house felt quiet. Peaceful, even. The kind of peace that only comes after a storm has wiped the land clean. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the matchbook from the gas station down the street. Struck one. The flame danced. She held it for a moment, just watching it flicker, then touched it to the hem of the curtain nearest Archie. It caught fast, hungry. Within seconds, the fire crawled across the walls like a living thing. Orange and yellow snakes of flame coiled through the living room, licking at furniture, photographs, hair, flesh. The house groaned, then screamed. The explosion came soon after, a muffled boom that cracked the windows and sent a plume of fire shooting through the roof like a dragon's final breath. From the street, it looked like the entire house was collapsing in on itself, swallowed in flame. Neighbors screamed. Dogs barked. Sirens wailed somewhere far off, but not fast enough. Inside, the Griggs family burned. Tameika had already left. By sunrise, she was found miles away, sitting in the charred remains of an abandoned Baptist church. The roof had long since collapsed, and the pews were scorched black with age. She sat at the altar, cigarette in hand, legs crossed, eyes steady. The smoke from her lips blended with the early morning fog. Her hands were blackened. Soot marked her cheeks. Her clothes were stiff from sweat and gasoline. But her eyes were calm. Unshaken. Almost holy. When the fire chief approached, carefully, slowly, like she was a wild animal, they asked her if she was okay. She turned, exhaled smoke, and said, "I baptized them in fire." There was no fear in her voice. No regret. Only the clarity of a woman who had finally, after a lifetime of being silenced, spoken in the loudest language she knew, flame. That night, Shreveport lost a house. But what it really lost, was a legacy of silence. Burned to ash by the girl who wouldn't stay quiet anymore. She was arrested shortly after, and the trial that followed became a media sensation. The trial of Tameika Griggs didn't just capture the public's attention, it hijacked it. Like a slow-motion train wreck, the entire country watched as the smoke cleared from the ashes of a family massacre and revealed a woman who was no longer hiding. She wasn't running. She wasn't crying. She was standing in front of the world with burnt hands, vacant eyes, and a truth too heavy to carry quietly anymore. The moment her mugshot hit the internet, it exploded. A mixture of haunted beauty and raw defiance, the look of someone who had spent her whole life waiting for someone to listen. And now, finally, the whole world had tuned in. The courthouse in Shreveport became a battlefield. Reporters from CNN, Court TV, even international outlets flooded the lawn. Protesters clashed, some holding signs that read, "She survived hell," while others shouted, "Murder is murder." TikToks dissected her every courtroom expression. Podcast hosts turned her life into episodes, calling her the Phoenix in Louisiana. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the full story. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The prosecution came out swinging, painting Tameika as a premeditated killer. Cold. Calculated. Dangerous. They showed surveillance footage from the gas station where she purchased 6 gallons of gasoline. They played her taped confession where she calmly recounted putting temazepam in her family's gumbo. No tears. No remorse. Just a chilling serenity. She knew exactly what she was doing, the district attorney said to the jury. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration of war. But the defense had their own war to fight. They brought in psychologists, trauma specialists, people who had combed through Tameika's past like forensic archaeologists. And what they uncovered was staggering. Records from childhood counselors who reported suspected abuse. Notes from teachers who were ignored. A sealed report from a school nurse who documented bruises on her thighs when she was just 8. None of it followed up on. None of it mattered back then. And then came the diagnoses. Complex PTSD. Borderline personality disorder. Dissociative amnesia. Each one an echo of the violence she'd endured. The experts described her mind like a battlefield, scorched earth where love once lived. They explained how trauma had rewired her brain, how her identity splintered just to survive. One doctor described her as a house on fire long before she ever struck a mat. But it was during the 3rd week of the trial that everything cracked open. The judge had just ruled against allowing certain childhood records to be entered into evidence. It was a procedural thing. But to Tameika, it felt like erasure. Like the silence all over again. She stood up, unshackled for the moment, and pointed a shaking hand at the bench. "You're just like Archie," she screamed. "Smiling behind your robe, pretending you care. But you don't. You never did. None of you did." Gasps echoed through the room. The bailiffs rushed in, but Tameika didn't fight. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, trembling, voice breaking, not with rage, but with a grief too deep to measure. The most chilling moment came when a court-appointed psychiatrist asked her if she regretted it. Tameika looked him dead in the eyes and said, "The devil lived in that house. I just turned up the heat." The court recessed immediately. The media lost its mind. The judge ordered a full psychological evaluation. She was transferred to a secure psychiatric facility for assessment. And the results only deepened the divide. Those diagnoses weren't just buzzwords. They were the bloodstains on her psyche. Experts testified that Tameika wasn't fully present during the murders, that her mind had fractured, splintering into survival mode. She wasn't reliving the moment. She was reliving every moment. Every night. Every locked door. Every "no one believed me." Still, the question loomed, was trauma an excuse for mass murder? Some jurors looked at her and saw a victim of systemic failure. Others saw a murderer who had taken justice into her own hands. And in the middle of it all, Tameika, sitting silent now, not because she was guilty or ashamed, but because she was tired of trying to explain a life no one had cared to understand until it was too late. In December of 2024, the gavel finally came down. The jury had heard enough. The world had seen enough. Tameika Griggs, once a voiceless child, then a silent survivor, and now a woman who burned her past to the ground, was convicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was tense, filled with the heavy breathing of reporters, spectators, and a few remaining family members who hadn't been in the house that night. No one looked at Tameika, and she didn't look at them either. Her eyes were steady, fixed on something only she could see, maybe the flames, maybe her younger self, maybe nothing at all. The judge, a seasoned man who had heard confessions from the worst humanity had to offer, stood visibly shaken. His voice cracked ever so slightly as he addressed her. "You are both the victim and the villain. And that's the tragedy." No gasps. No murmurs. Just silence. A silence that felt almost reverent, as if even justice knew this case was too tangled in pain to be judged cleanly. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. Some held signs reading, "Justice for Tameika," others decried her as a cold-blooded killer who took innocent lives. News outlets replayed the same footage of her being led out in cuffs, stoic, motionless, lips pressed together like she'd finally found the silence she was searching for. But back in Shreveport, down on the east side where the street signs are rusted and forgotten, the house still stands. Or what's left of it. The foundation of the Griggs home remains untouched. The walls, blackened and skeletal, reach toward the sky like charred hands frozen in a final plea. No one rebuilt. No one bulldozed. No one dared. Neighbors cross the street when they pass it now. Children whisper stories about screams and ghosts and the smell of gasoline that still clings to the soil. It's a burnt altar to a family that failed to protect their daughter, and a daughter who returned the favor with fire. They say time heals all wounds. But some wounds are meant to scar. Tameika's story didn't end in court. It didn't end in flames. It lives on, flickering in the shadows of a house no one wants to claim, and in the haunted eyes of a woman who learned too late that survival sometimes comes at the cost of your soul. This is a story of unimaginable pain and unspeakable vengeance. Of a little girl whose cries were swallowed by silence, whose trauma went unacknowledged, unhealed, and whose rage, when it finally rose, came not with a scream, but with a match. Tameika's fire wasn't just about destruction. It was a cleansing. A purge. A reckoning. For every year she spent trapped in the shadows of that house, she lit a corner of it in flame. For every person who looked away, she gave them something they could never ignore. Her fire was her voice. But was it justice, or just devastation? Do you think Tameika's rage was justified after years of torment? Or was she consumed by a darkness that no amount of fire could burn away? Could anything, or anyone, have saved her from the path she chose? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this story left you speechless, like and subscribe for more haunting tales of trauma, betrayal, and the terrifying lengths some will go to reclaim their power.